listening to Convenience Matters, brought to you by NACS. We'll talk about what we see at stores and what the future may hold for our industry.
EVs are certainly having their moment. Sales are growing, you're seeing more cars on the road, and you're definitely seeing EVs more in the news. We're going to take a look at the news and the big stories related to EVs, and we'll spend a little time separating reality from hype. Joining us today to talk about what's going on with EVs and looking at big picture is John Eichberger, Executive Director of Transportation Energy Institute and a multi-time host and guest on the show. So hello again, John.
Hey, Jeff. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I'm glad to be back.
It's a good thing. Let's dive right in. EVs have been in the news. There was a news report the other day. Let's start with this one. The news said third quarter new car sales in the United States, 18% were electric. And from that, people say 1 out of 5 new cars sold in the country is electric. It's clear we're on our way. Next year, it's a hockey stick. Next year, it's going to be 40%. Then it's going to be 60%. Then it's going to be 100%. This just proves it. Let's dive a little bit into that number, that 18% number.
There was years ago, a very popular and very famous trial in which a esteemed public official, we'll use that lightly, said, it depends on what the definition of is. Electric vehicles used in the context of the headline you just mentioned is so misleading. Most people think electric vehicles is a Tesla. Battery electric, plug-in, no gas, no engine, pure battery electric vehicle, which is what a lot of people are pushing for. That number is 7%. The 18% includes plug-in hybrids, which have a gasoline engine and a plug-in battery. It also includes traditional hybrid vehicles that have no plug and have a battery that supports greater efficiency, greater acceleration, and improves emissions. When you lump them all together, we're probably 15 to 18% of sales last year had some sort of electrification component to it. But man, the hype of misleading headlines and lumping things together is very troubling because it provides policymakers and advocates with false security, false confidence. And we've actually seen the sales of EV growth slow. They're still being sold. They're still growing. The rate of growth has slowed, as I've been predicting for years. The more you sell, the harder it is to continue doubling your sales every year. It's reality. It's math. My daughter's 9 years old in 4th grade, and I have to Google all of her math lessons because it's just math is getting stupid. But the fundamentals are the more you sell, the harder it is to continue growing at high rates. We've seen other headlines that are also misleading and can lead to misperceptions. Some of the major automakers have backed off of their pledges of EV sales in the next couple of years. They've held off on investments in battery plants because sales are slowing. I did a presentation recently where I threw some of those headlines on the screen. I said, you read just those headlines, you think, the EV revolution is over. It fizzled out. It was a dud. No worries. That's not true either. And it's just incredibly disconcerting how we grab one piece of evidence and we blow it so out of proportion. And it completely derails our long-term strategies. So that's my reaction to that headline. Sorry, you pulled my string. I keep talking.
Yes. Now, and our discussion here isn't to demonize EVs by any means. It's to look at what is really going on, because to a certain sense, or I guess the best way of saying it is, EVs, welcome to the club. You've been politicized. And you have folks, just like with oil, and you have folks that think EVs are the greatest thing in the world, and they'll find any number that supports that. And you'll find others on the other side that think that EVs are going to lead to the the fall of civilization, and they will find any number that supports that. Throw oil in there, throw anything else in there, and it's the same story. So we will see more of those numbers, like the 18%. And it's good to have that breakdown. When you talk about the automakers dialing back, I think one of the things is you look at not just where they might be dialing back in highly developed countries, but where they're still not even pursuing some of the less developed countries. You're not, as we build out an infrastructure in the US and Europe and countries similar in economics, you're not going to see that same build out in Africa, in South America, to a great extent. That's going to take more time. So automakers are also hedging bets on, yes, there might be some EVs in the developed countries, but there's going to be very few in some of these less developed countries.
And I think that's the key. We talk about the U.S. market centric, and it's a big market. It's 22, 23% of the global market. Europe's 22, 23%. Then you got China sitting at the 30, 35% of the global auto market. All three of those economies are trying to figure out how we reduce carbon emissions, and electric vehicles is a big part of that. And it's meaningfully, it should be. EVs have a great role to play. And that's, you're looking at 35 and 75% of the global market. That is driving much of the investment decisions of the automakers, because that's the primary market they're serving. But there's another 25% of the market in the world that is not ready. I was just trying to find a blog I published last year that brought up a whole bunch of data. But one I remember is there are still 1 billion people who do not have running plumbing in their houses in the world. And there's 2 billion people that don't have working electricity in their homes. These are individuals who do not care about what we are talking about right now. Okay, they have
it's a self-driving EV.
Woohoo! Great. They have fundamental survival issues that they're dealing with, and you're not going to be able to take them on the electrification journey the way you might be able to in Europe and North America. But I think the fundamentals here, I think, are somewhat entertaining, because I'm not the one having to deal with them. Right? I get to just watch them and comment on them. We have politicians who have decided they know the answer to climate change, to electrification. Our study last year showed electric vehicles are 40% less carbon intense than a combustion vehicle. They are not zero emission vehicles. There's no such thing as a zero emission vehicle, despite what the politicians try to tell us. But that is driving the agenda. And it's forcing automakers to make investments and retool their production structures and stuff. What's missing from this is the fact that these automakers are publicly traded companies. And I saw an article recently that showed that the major automakers are still losing $60,000 for every electric vehicle they sell. Last I checked, the role of a publicly traded company was to create value for their shareholders. If you're losing $60,000 per electric vehicle you're selling, you have to make it up somewhere else. But that is $60,000 of just lost profit opportunity. That is not sustainable until these vehicles become profitable, until they become economically advantageous on the surface for the purchase of the vehicle to the consumer. Until electric vehicle charging infrastructure becomes a for-profit enterprise that businesses want to invest in, we're going to constantly be in this up and down roller coaster of the EV evolution. And the policymakers are going to try to throw money at it and try to fix it. Policymakers can't fix this. The government can't fix this. The economics of the enterprise have to evolve, and they will. Eventually, we're going to get to where the automakers make money, the charging stations make money, the consumers are better off financially, and EVs will have a greater market share. We're not there yet. And I think what's interesting is some have called it the EV revolution. Look up the definition of revolution. That's a sudden, usually violent, complete reversal of direction. We're in a slow evolution to a more sustainable, the environmentally co-opted word sustainable, a more environmentally sensitive transportation system, which is going to include electric vehicles, is going to include natural gas vehicles, it's going to include hydrogen vehicles, it's going to include something new. But I think we have to recognize we are in the very, very early stages of this. We've been doing this now, 5-10 years? Come on. It took us how long to develop the gasoline distribution infrastructure and an economic model that worked? Decades. And we have 1.5 billion vehicles in the world predicated on that legacy system. You can't flip a switch and turn that over overnight.
So you mentioned the two ICs, and you can spell it economics and politics, and you can spell them the ICs the way that spell check would tell you to, or you can spell it ICK to
right.
IC. And that's, I guess, a fundamental challenge that we face in how you were talking about this. Politics is very much, how am I polling? What can I say? How do I react to something that's in the moment? And when you're talking economics and car sales, car development of cars, you're talking 5-6 years from let's do this, if you're an automaker, to being in a showroom, to just even having your first sale. So when politics of the moment dictates economics, it's going to be bumpy. And we're looking at next year, House, Senate, White House, all in play as they are every 4 years at this time.
Yeah.
So there's a lot, I think, that people are just saying, how do we prepare when there's so much unknown, whether I'm involved in EV charging, in looking to install them, or I'm looking to sell cars, or I'm looking to change my business. How do you navigate that when you're dealing with these, I'll call them again, the two X?
It's tough. There was a movie in the 90s called The American President. And the president's pollster in the movie was asked, how could the president's poll numbers change so dramatically so quickly? And the pollster goes, Americans have mood swings. I could explain it more, but I need charts and graphs. That is no more true then than it is today. We are living in a political environment that operates on 2 to 4 year cycles. If you're lucky, maybe 8 years, some consistency. But for the most part, 2 to 4 years, we're taking a pulse of the American public to see what they can stomach. The current administration believes electric vehicles are the future. They have created programs and they got funding from the Congress, and they are doing a variety of things. They have a new program on fuel economy that most people are saying that means 2/3 of new sales in 2032 will have to be electric. Okay, so that's one end of the spectrum.
But we're already at 18%.
No, don't bait me. Don't bait me. You also have significant leaders within the administration telling our industry, we don't want to talk about liquid. You may have a zero carbon liquid. We don't want to hear about it. All we're talking about is electric. They won't talk about it.
You mean like hydrogen?
I'm talking about renewable diesel. I'm talking about low carbon liquid fuels. They don't want to hear about it because that's not what they're focused on. Okay, so that's one end of the spectrum. Then you have former President Trump, who has come out and say on day one, I'm going to open up the oil spigots when I'm reelected. He always says when I'm reelected, not if. But so when I'm reelected, I'm going to open up the oil spigots. So I'm in the industry. I'm trying to think, do I make gas cars? Do I make electric cars? Do I install a charger? Do I install more gas pumps and replace my tanks? Do I poke more holes in the ground and pull up oil? Or do I shutter them and buy lithium reserves? You don't know. And the problem we have right now is until the ick of economics kicks the ick of politics out of the equation, we're never going to know. Because that seesaw, that pendulum, left, right, when you have an emerging industry that is so dependent on government policy, it has to be dependent on consumer demand. And until consumer demand catches up with the political aspirations, we're going to have struggles. We're going to have ups and downs. And there's going to be celebrations. There's going to be depression. And that's not a way to run a business. And that's, Transportation, Energy, and Steel, we're looking at the fundamentals of what can make a low emitting transportation market effective for all consumers and all business owners. It can't be myopic. It can't be tunnel vision. We have to be open to innovation. We have to be open to new opportunities. I am a strong believer that electric vehicles are going to be a huge player in the market going forward. I'm also a strong believer that innovation of people so much smarter than me can bring new solutions to the table that work even better for certain situations and certain stakeholders and certain communities. We've got to embrace all of our opportunities. We can do it. We just have to be allowed to do it. And if we're going to be continually asking government, please, sir, can I have some more? We become wards of the state and not in control of our own destiny, which means, guess what? We're never going to reach profitability. And sustainable business strategies, see what I did there? Not sustainable environmental, but long-term, enduring business strategy that also, by the way, benefits the environment. That's where we got to be striving to. And the headlines you mentioned, the headlines I mentioned, just are evidence of the pendulum nature of this transition that is so dependent on government policy. We've got to break the leash from government and do it because it's the right thing to do and it makes economic sense.
So normally I'd say that's a perfect way to wrap this up. But I want to throw out one more news story before we wrap it up. We talked about the 18% of new car sales in the third quarter in the U.S. were EVs. And of course, that's not true. Another news story that we've seen recently is you can buy an EV in China for $10,000. Mm-hmm. So that just shows that the economic discussion that we've had really doesn't make any sense, because all we need to do is buy one of those Chinese EVs. What's behind that one?
Okay, well, I mean, we can get into Chinese politics, Chinese economics, and Chinese manufacturing quality if we want to. I don't want to be driving a $10,000 Chinese manufactured electric vehicle that I just don't want to. Not going to put my daughter in it, not going to put myself in it, right? China is a juggernaut in the electric vehicle space. They own most of the critical mineral reserves. They are the largest battery manufacturer in the world. The Inflation Reduction Act has a provision put into it by the Congress that limits tax credits for buyers, tax credits and incentives for manufacturers predicated on their made in America components. And Chinese components do not qualify and they jeopardize. So there's a huge fight between two major automakers. How would the IRS interpret that language? There was one building a battery factory using a licensed technology from a China processor. Does that mean that those batteries are Chinese and not eligible for the tax credits that the customer needs to make the EV affordable? Or is it just a technology licensing agreement? Does that not apply? The company investing said, well, it shouldn't apply. I mean, we're just licensing the technology. So they're not making it. We're making it. Their major competitor goes, whoa. That's a nuance that is not okay. It's a Chinese technology. It's Chinese. And China is, when you and I were growing up, the Soviet threat. Well, now it's the Chinese threat, right? And China has become more politicized than anything in foreign policy economics. That's a huge deal. And so can China produce a $10,000 EV? Of course they can. Do we want to buy it? I'll leave that to anybody else's discretion. In the United States, our demand for vehicles is very different than anywhere else. Europe is further ahead of us on electrification because they're used to driving small cars. You take a European model vehicle and try to sell it in Wyoming or Texas, it's going to collect dust. We like our trucks. We like our big vehicles, which means that we need different battery technology. We need different infrastructure to support those vehicles, because customers in the United States are not going to buy a small vehicle because it is better for the environment. They're going to buy the vehicle they want to buy. And if it happens to be electric and they like that, they'll buy that. But you have to build the vehicle they want first. Otherwise, they're not going to pay attention to your technology. And that That's a huge distinction between what we need in the United States and what other markets can support.
Which is solve somebody's problem. Don't just build something and then assume the problem comes to you. And I would imagine that people are much more likely to buy a Ford F-150 that you can also use to generate power for your house if there's a blackout. And maybe the Chinese car might be able to power a flashlight or a portable radio, or maybe your cell phone for a couple hours. But it really does come down to solving problems. And not only are people different across countries, people are different across regions, and they're different across the same region. So there's an awful lot to take into account here. And that really was the whole point of our discussion today. It was your big prediction for 2024. There's going to be a lot more discussion of EVs. There's going to be a lot more hype. It's an election year. Oil, EVs, you name it, whatever we haven't talked about will be politicized, whether it involves energy or something else. Yeah. And it's really, really important to separate fact from fiction. What's a talking point that scores points as opposed to what's a fact that is moving something and has an economic impact. So a lot more of this to come. The good news is NACS has some good materials, and as we build out our Fuels Resource Center for 2024, we will continue to do that. The Transportation Energy Institute has amazing nonpartisan information about EVs, about all kinds of stuff. Both of our organizations also work with third-party groups, AAA, U.S. Department of Energy, etc., to ensure that the stuff that we're talking about is stuff that other people are talking about, because that validates that what we're talking about makes sense and others agree. So how can people find out more about TFI and separate some of this fact from fiction?
You go to transportationenergy.org. It's a mouthful, but it gets you where you need to go. On there, I've got go to resources and go to the commute. That's my monthly blog. If you want more just kind of, I guess, tongue-in-cheek analysis, go there. I try to make it a little more fun. But we also have about 75 research papers we published available for free to anybody who wants to read them, range from electric vehicles to biofuels to oil to vehicles to consumer behavior, you name it. I mean, our board, Jeff, is 67 companies wide, ranging the entire spectrum of stakeholders who care about the transportation future. And we're going to continue focusing on the facts and objective analysis so people can make better informed decisions. And we believe that when people are more knowledgeable, the decisions they make will benefit the market better than those who are making decisions based upon philosophy.
Well, thank you for joining us today, John. And for those who listen on the first day this comes out, be sure to send John a happy birthday. And thank you all for listening to Convenience Matters.
Convenience Matters is brought to you by NACS and produced in partnership with Human Factor. For more information, visit convenience.org.